Hey my watchers, welcome. Today we are gonna see. What if Harry Potter was master of death, son of Tony Stark? Tony was not having a great day. Well, that was an understatement. You do not find yourself finding out that you have a daughter every day. Most would meet their daughter in a hospital room in her birthday, not in a cell. And you are sure she is mine? For the 100th time, Mr. Stark. She is yours. We did the test like 3 times, said Agent Pine with a sigh. She looked through the files and gave him a tired look. I understand that you are a public figure and have your doubts about the accuracy of the test. That is why we sent your team her blood, so you can test it yourself. She was still talking, but honestly, Tony had stopped listening to a long time ago. He looked through the glass to the teenage girl. She was resting her face on the table. Only visible thing about her was her deep brown hair, which was the same shade as his. He told himself that it did not mean anything. Why did you arrest her? Officer rubbed her temples with a sigh. She stole a broomstick. That made Tony freeze. She stole a dash. Yes, he started to laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. Honestly, he was expecting in the lines of drugs, not some broomstick. Mr. Stark, this is serious, officer said with a glare. She does not have a passport, nor any identification. She entered the country illegally. Lips pursed, and went feral when we tried to take her blood. Wait. You are telling me she is not American? No, she is British according to her. I explained all of this on the phone.
No.
Yes, I didn't listen after the "you have a kid" part, Tony said with a frustrated sigh. This is not real. This can't be real. Nothing to worry about. He took a deep breath. I'll contact you after we do our own paternal test, Agent Pine. One last look at the glass and he finally turned around to leave. But of course, the agent stopped him. Of course. If you do not claim paternity, we must deport her in a week. Hallie banged her head on the table again. It has been a month since she crossed the border, and she has finally done something stupid just because she missed flying. Maybe it was wrong for her to come US without a passport, and maybe she should have just paid for the bloody broom. But in her defense, the woman was trying to scam her. She lifted her head and looked at the clock. Sitting in an interrogation room was not in her bingo cart. The door opened and a middle-aged woman came in. She was carrying coffee and a paper bag. She put it in front of her a little harshly, spilling the coffee. Eat. Hallie opened the paper bag hesitantly. Her stomach gave a growl. There was a burger and fries, which she hadn't had before. Well, she was experiencing a lot of firsts today. The agent watched her eat for a moment, head tilted. Do you realize that you are in a lot of trouble? Yes, agent sighed. Name. Hallie debated whether she should give her name for a moment. There was no point of hiding it, she decided. They were bunch of muggles anyway. Harry Potter, she said finally, and watched as agent scribbled on the file. Hallie, is your parents aware that you are here? Hallie wiped her hands and crossed her arms, looking her with a frown. I am 18, she lied. Be honest, girl. You don't look a day over 15-inch. That made her glare. She did not look that small. Try growing up under stairs, she wanted to say, but bit her tongue. I don't have parents and my guardian couldn't care less. Agent's eyes softened a bit. Your stepdad is deceased too? She frowned. My stepdad? I never had a stepdad. This was going weird, fast. My parents died at the same time. Why would you assume that I had a stepdad? The agent looked through the other side of the big glass mirror like she could see the person behind it. She fidgeted with the papers uncomfortably. Hallie, we found your father. What do you mean you found my father? She asked, her brow furrowed in disbelief. Was this some kind of twisted joke? So it was far from funny. Her father couldn't possibly be. Hirhei was dead. For Merlin's sake. Unless he somehow had a Horcrux, which, of course, he didn't. There was no way he could have come back from the dead. And even if he had, she would have known about it. I mean exactly that, Miss Potter, came the reply, calm and unwavering. No, that's impossible. My father is dead. He has been for years. She shouted, her voice rising before she could stop herself. Her breathing grew uneven, disbelief and panic clawing at her chest. No, the muggles must have made a mistake. Of course they had. The DNA thing must be wrong. James Potter couldn't be alive. If he were, he would have found her. Years ago. He would have. And yet, she couldn't stop her eyes from darting to the one-way glass, half expecting her dad to step through the door at any moment. He is not dead at all. He never died, as far as I know, the woman said with an infuriatingly casual tone, as if it were some kind of joke. Her patience snapped. Yeah. Then why was he never there? She spat. Her voice was sharp and venomous, laced with years of pain and frustration. It had to be a trick. Polyjuice potion. Someone was playing games with her, probably after the family fortune. They must have heard that the block on the Grand Vault had been lifted, and now they wanted their share. If the next person who walked in looked even remotely like her dead father, she was going to bloody kill them. The woman's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts like a knife. He didn't know about you. Bloody hell. She exploded. Are you seriously saying he forgot about his daughter? His friends? The entire bloody whiz-dash? She stopped herself, sucking in a deep breath to calm the storm rising in her chest. Her tone dropped, cold and accusing. Is he claiming some sort of memory loss? No, the woman replied coolly, her composure maddening. He genuinely had no idea about you. Not until this morning, when we caught you without proper documentation. Her jaw dropped, disbelief written all over her face. What? You heard me, the woman continued, her voice taking on a sharp, accusatory edge. How exactly did you get past the border? And why? You don't even need a visa, just a passport. Yet here you are, causing an international mess. I am having a crisis over here, and that's your concern. She snapped, throwing her hands up in exasperation. You drop a bombshell that my dead father is apparently alive, and you want to lecture me about passports? Her voice cracked, and she could feel the tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. I had my reasons. She had her reasons, all right, but there was no way she was sharing them with this woman. I'm not talking to you anymore. All you do is talk nonsense. Besides, you can't question me without a lawyer. I'm a minor. The woman raised an eyebrow. Thought you were 18? Shut up. Hallie snapped, her voice cutting like a whip. The woman sighed, clearly done with the conversation. She took a deep breath, shook her head in frustration, and stepped out of the room without another word. As soon as the door closed, Hallie buried her face in her hands, her head heavy and throbbing with the weight of everything she had just heard. The room felt stifling, the silence pressing down on her. She rested her forehead against the cool surface of the table, wishing desperately for some clarity, for some comfort. Her mind drifted to Hermione. She'd know what to do. She always does. The thought hit her like a pang, and she quickly shoved it away. No, she didn't want to see anyone from home. Not now. Not ever. This was her mess, and she'd deal with it on her own. Or at least she'd try. After what felt like hours, the door finally opened, and a man walked in. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored Armani suit. She only recognized it because she'd recently gone shopping there. After all, what was the point of money if she wasn't going to spend it? The man wasn't particularly tall, his presence more sharp than imposing. He had a neatly trimmed goatee and a pair of glasses that were just a bit odd. The kind of odd that made you wonder if they were some experimental fashion statement or a necessary evil he refused to replace. What could she say? The lawyer she deserves. She snorted under her breath. Just kidding. It was about time they found me a lawyer, she said, her gaze fixed on the man as he walked in. The awkward expression on his face quickly morphed into one of sheer disbelief. Excuse me? He blurted, his tone sharp, almost offended. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with feigned confidence. You look like a very good lawyer, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, though the corners of her mouth twitched as if daring him to prove her wrong. The man blinked at her, clearly caught off guard. You don't know who I am? He asked, his voice incredulous, as though the very idea was preposterous. She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Are you someone important? He looked at her, his brows lifting in surprise, then cracked a grin. No, not at all, he said, his tone laced with amusement as he pulled out the chair and sat across from her. But I'm not your lawyer, kid. I'm the one that annoying cop wouldn't stop talking about. She tilted her head, her expression deadpan. Are you my missing documents? The grin widened, and he chuckled. No, not quite. Your father, he said. Though for someone who seemed so self-assured, the words stumbled out of his mouth, hesitant and awkward. Her mouth opened, then closed like a gaping fish. She stared at him in disbelief. He wasn't even pretending. No polijuise potion. No disguises nothing. Hallie narrowed her eyes, her disbelief hardening into irritation. No, you're not. She shot back, her voice firm and laced with defiance. Science doesn't lie. Kid, he replied, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table as if it were supposed to explain everything. She glanced at it but didn't touch it. Instead, her eyes snapped back to him, cold and unwavering. I know how my father looks, she said sharply. And you? You're not even trying. Hallie pinched the bridge of her nose, the tension building in her head. So, you're saying that you're James Potter? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The absurdity of it all was starting to weigh on her. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. You know what? Can't believe I even got worried for a second. My dad isn't back from the dead. This is just some weird scam. She shook her head, gesturing at him as if he were some kind of bad joke taken too far. Listen, she continued, her tone casual but cutting. If it's money you're after, you're out of luck. I'm an irresponsible teenager. I spent it all. Sorry to disappoint. Her lips curled into a smirk, though her eyes betrayed the sting of frustration. The man blinked once, then twice, before bursting into laughter. Believe me, I'm not after your money. Hallie crossed her arms, glaring at him as his laughter echoed in the small room. It wasn't loud or mocking, but something about it got under her skin. Then what the hell are you after? She demanded, her voice sharp. The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his smirk softening into something resembling patience, though she doubted he had much of it. I'm not here to take anything from you, kid, he said, his voice even now, calm in a way that almost made her angrier. I came here because he stopped, exhaling heavily as if debating how to phrase his next words. I had no idea you even existed until recently. Her mouth twisted into a scowl. Convenient, she shot back. Do you have any idea how many scams I've seen pulled over my dad's name? People just like you showing up out of nowhere with proof and sob stories? She jabbed a finger toward the paper he'd slid across the table. What makes you any different? Because I don't need to scam you, he replied, the grin creeping back onto his face. I'm not here for money, and frankly, I have better things to do than sit here convincing a stubborn teenager that I'm not full of it. He paused, tapping the table with his finger. But if you really want to know what makes me different, he leaned back in his chair, looking her dead in the eye. It's because the science doesn't lie. And whether you want to accept it or not, that paper right there proves I'm telling the truth. Hallie stared at him, refusing to pick up the paper. This doesn't make any sense, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying her composure. My father, he's dead. He died protecting me. There's no way. She paused, her eyes narrowing as a new thought struck her like a lightning bolt. And there is no way my mom cheated. The words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. She hated how they sounded. Hated that she had even said them. Her mother would never, at least. That's what she had always believed. That's what everyone always told her. This one wasn't pretending to be James. He wasn't even trying to claim he was. But the paper, it looked official, all legal and tidy, and it stared back at her like it knew something she didn't. She could already feel the dull throb of a headache creeping in. My parents were happily married, she said, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. As far as I've heard. Her words sounded fragile, like they could shatter under the weight of her own doubt. The man didn't laugh this time. He didn't even smirk. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. What was your mom's name? Lily Evans, she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. She hated how her stomach twisted as she said it, unsure of what she even expected him to say. He pressed his lips together, his brow furrowing deeply. He looked like he was thinking hard. Too hard. All right, he finally said, his tone quiet, almost hesitant. Tony. The kid was so sure he was dead. He felt awful, completely gutted. All the time he'd been standing behind the glass, listening to everything she said. It was like each word stabbed his heart like a piece of shrapnel. Why wasn't he there then? That question had lingered in the air, heavy and damning. He felt his heart pang again as it replayed in his head. Who knew where she'd been all these years? Foster care? The streets? She told the officer her parents died when she was a baby, and from the way she carried herself, it was clear she hadn't had an easy life. That much was obvious. There was something in her ice and edge, a guardedness that made her seem older than her years, like she'd seen more than she should have. And God, he felt like a complete jerk. This wasn't her fault. It wasn't her mess. Yet here she was, sitting on the other side of that table, shoulders stiff and defiant, lashing out like someone who'd been fighting her whole life. He couldn't blame her. How could he? From her perspective, he hadn't been there. He'd been nothing but an absence in her Lithia gap no amount of reasoning or DNA tests could fill. He leaned against the wall outside the room, dragging a hand through his hair and letting out a shaky breath. He didn't know how to fix this or even where to start. But one thing was clear. If she hated him now, it was probably nothing compared to what she'd feel if he screwed this up any further. So when the cop finally gave up and left, he walked in. But there was not an ounce of recognition on the kid's face. So when the cop finally gave up and left, he walked in. But there was not an ounce of recognition on the kid's face. And apparently she thought he would be her mother's late husband. That's why she had been so insistent about him being dead. And she had accused him of being a scammer. For her money? This was a real roller coaster. And how the fuck would you tell a kid that you don't remember their mother? The one that birthed them, all right? She asked, her green eyes locking onto him, accusing and unrelenting. That's it? Tony sighed, leaning back slightly. I don't know everything, kiddo. Maybe your mom wasn't married at the time? I can't say. What matters right now is that I can get you out of here. Her scowl deepened. I can get out myself. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Right? I'm sure you can just teleport out of custody somehow. But there's no need for you to build a teleportation machine. I can get you out of here legally. As in, you don't need to get deported if you're a citizen. She sat there, defiant, her green eyes glaring at him with unshakable distrust. You wouldn't want me, she said matter-of-factly, her voice steady, almost detached. I've been told I'm trouble. Tony felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut, leaving an ache in his chest that he hadn't been prepared for. Honestly, this was a bit much for his heart to handle. Someone had made his kid believe she was trouble, that she was somehow not worthy. He could see it in her eyes, hidden behind the sharpness of her tone, the bravado in her posture. There was pain there, buried deep, etched into the way she carried herself. Who told you that? He asked softly, leaning forward, his voice calm but laced with something fierce beneath the surface. It doesn't matter. Why else would I sit in a cell? I am a criminal. Tony stayed frozen in place, staring at the girl through the glass as her words replayed in his head. I'm a criminal. She'd said it so casually, like she'd just confessed to pulling off some massive heist or orchestrating some international scheme. You're not a criminal, Tony said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. At worst, you're a shoplifter. And that doesn't make you a criminal, it makes you a kid who made a mistake. She flinched slightly at his words, but her arms stayed crossed, her glare unyielding. It doesn't matter. It's what they'll say anyway. It's what they always say. Tony shook his head, leaning forward, his voice softening. No, what they say doesn't matter. What matters is what you believe. And here's what I believe, you're not trouble. You're not some lost cause. And you sure as hell don't belong in a cell. He paused, locking eyes with her. You're coming home with me. Her glare faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and maybe something else, hope, though she'd never admit it. What? She asked, her voice quieter, almost unsure. You heard me, Tony said, standing up and straightening his jacket. You're coming home with me. End of discussion. She blinked at him, clearly unsure whether to laugh or argue. You can't just, yes, I can, he interrupted, his tone decisive. Because I'm your dad, whether you like it or not. And dads don't leave their kids sitting in cells, no matter how trouble they think they are. Her mouth opened like she was about to fire back, but no words came out. She just stared at him, her walls cracking ever so slightly as she tried to process what he'd just said. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what to say. Tony didn't wait for her to figure it out. Let's go, kid, he said, walking toward the door. We've got a lot to figure out, but step one, getting you out of here. When Tony had said he had no reason to scam her for money, Hallie had honestly not believed it. But after seeing this home, if you could even call it that, she started to get it. It was a bloody tower, for Merlin's sake. Who was this guy? Well, apparently he was her father. The words still felt foreign in her mouth, like they didn't belong there. Hallie still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that James Potter wasn't her biological dad. Everyone kept talking about how much she looked like him. Even Sirius, for Merlin's sake, had slipped up a few times, calling her James by accident. Don't think about Sirius. She took a deep breath, pushing the thoughts aside. But it was hard not to think about Sirius. He was her anchor, her family. The one who had been there always. The one who would never have believed her being anyone else's daughter. And here she was, standing in front of a man she barely knew who, by all accounts, looked like James too. Merlin, was this some twisted joke? Did James even know? Did anyone know? Hallie turned her gaze back to Tony, trying to steady herself, but the questions kept swirling, knotting up her insides. What if Sirius found out? Would he hate him? Would he hate her? Her thoughts were a blur, each question leading to another, and the walls of the penthouse, with their towering windows and sleek, modern furnishings, seemed to close in on her. It was all too much, too unreal. She wasn't ready for this. Don't think about Sirius. She exhaled sharply. Tony led the way, his confident stride echoing in the sleek marble hallway. But Hallie couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into another world, one that felt more like a showroom than a home. She clutched the bag from the station a little tighter, the familiar weight offering a strange comfort. Not that she was hungry, not really. It was more about the control, the safety net. You never knew when you'd be hungry again with adults. When they reached the lift, Hallie stepped in without saying a word. The shiny metallic doors closed with a soft ding as they began their ascent, and she stared at the glowing numbers above the door. It felt like she was being pulled upward, higher and higher, into something she wasn't ready for. The lift halted with a soft clunk, and Tony's voice broke through her thoughts. Here we are. The doors slid open, and Hallie hesitated, her gaze sweeping across the space before her. The place was massive, far more spacious than anything she'd ever imagined. It gleamed in the light, every surface pristine and untouched. It reminded her of the Dursleys' house, not because it was ugly or tacky, but because it was so bloody clean, like Aunt Petunia's obsessive need for order. How every inch of the house had to be spotless. How Hallie was made to scrub and polish until her hands bled just to meet her aunt's standards, until she could almost smell the dirt that wasn't there. This place was too clean, too perfect. Well, Tony turned, raising an eyebrow as if expecting her to gush or admire the space. Hallie bit back a harsh laugh. It's a bit much, she said instead, her voice coming out more strained than she'd intended. Clean. Tony smirked, crossing his arms. I suppose you can call it that. I like things neat. That was all she could manage. Maybe she should have just left when she had the chance. She'd done fine on her own for a while, money wasn't an issue, and she hadn't had to answer to anyone. But if she ran now, she'd probably get caught by the police and sent back to the Dursleys. Which, no thank you. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence, making her jump so hard she instinctively grabbed the wall for support. Welcome, Miss Hallie. Who was that? She demanded, whipping around, her heart hammering. A light flickered on the ceiling, but Tony didn't seem to notice. That's just Friday, he said with an easy smile. She's Irish. She manages the house. She scanned the room, searching for the woman behind the voice, but there was no one. Was this some kind of invisible house elf? Where is she? Tony chuckled. You can't see her. She's an AI. Ai? Hallie echoed, still uneasy. Of course he had a talking house. Tony nodded. Strolling toward the kitchen like this was the most normal conversation in the world. Artificial intelligence. Think of her like a really advanced assistant. Hallie blinked. You have an invisible talking assistant? Essentially, her mind reeled. Ai? Like a machine? A voice with no body? That was, well, bloody terrifying. Her only experience with things like this was Hogwarts ghosts and enchanted objects, and those at least had some kind of presence. Friday spoke again, her voice smooth and polite. Did I scared you, Miss Hallie? Hallie flinched again, her stomach twisting. No. I mean, I'm good. She clutched the leftover bag from the train tighter, not entirely convinced this Friday wouldn't try to levitate food onto her plate or something. Tony watched her reaction, amusement flickering in his eyes. You'll get used to it. Yeah, she muttered, glancing around once more. Sure. Tony leaned against the counter, tilting his head. So, what do you want to eat? Hallie hesitated. The question caught her off guard. No one had ever really asked her that before. At the Dursleys, she ate whatever scraps she could get. At Hogwarts, food just appeared like magic, and since she'd been on her own, she just grabbed whatever was closest, mostly instant noodles. Now, faced with the simple choice, she found herself completely lost. Dunno, she mumbled. What do you have? I was thinking of ordering something. You can check it out on DoorDash. DoorDash? Yeah, on your phone. Hallie shifted awkwardly. I don't have a phone. Tony blinked, clearly thrown off by that. You don't have a phone? Hallie shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Never needed one. Or rather, no one had ever thought she needed one. The Dursleys sure weren't about to buy her one. And at Hogwarts, magic and electronics didn't mix. Out in the real world, well, let's say she tried. But the blow-up? Multiple times. Tony exhaled. Okay, first things first, we're fixing that. He pulled out his own phone, tapping away. But for now, I'll order. Any allergies? No. Any preferences? Hallie hesitated. She still wasn't used to being asked what she wanted. Just something warm. Tony glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression, but he didn't comment. All right, something warm it is. Come on, don't just stand there. You can sit. Tony gestured to the kitchen island, his voice softening a bit. She slowly made her way over and sat on one of the stools, still holding the bag tightly in her lap. She felt a bit out of place, like she didn't belong here, but at least the seat was comfortable. Tony grabbed his phone from his pocket and began scrolling through it. I'm ordering Thai, Tony said, tapping away on his screen. All right, Hallie muttered, not really registering the change in cuisine. Her mind was still buzzing from everything. Tony looked over at her, a curious glint in his eye. You talked way more in the station. Hallie tensed, her grip tightening around the bag in her lap. She hadn't realized how quiet she'd become since arriving. The station had been different. It had been chaotic, the kind of noise that made you feel like you had to shout to be heard. But here, everything felt so still, almost too still. She wasn't sure what to say or how to act. I guess I was just distracted, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Tony studied her for a moment, his expression softening. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. It's okay to just take everything in. Tony leaned back against the counter, rubbing his face with his hand. He was trying his best to be the responsible adult here, but everything about the situation was overwhelming. He had a 14-year-old daughter who was so jumpy, so cautious. He wasn't sure how to get through to her. And the phone. What kind of teenager didn't have a phone in this age? It wasn't even about the convenience anymore. It was about the fact that every other kid her age probably had one glued to their hand. And yet, Hallie had nothing. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just avoiding it. She was missing something. Trust? Confidence? Maybe even a bit of both. Look, Hallie, Tony said, trying to keep his voice calm, even though his patience was fraying at the edges. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight, but If we're gonna make this work, we need to start somewhere. Having a phone, I think, would be a good place to start. Just to— I don't need it, Hallie interrupted, her tone firm. You definitely do, Tony replied, his voice softening but still insistent. She shrugged, her eyes avoiding his. I'm not good with that stuff. I break them. You break them? Tony raised an eyebrow, his surprise obvious. He was Tony Stark, after all. No kid of his could be bad at technology. Those kinds of things blow up? Hallie muttered, her voice edged with a hint of frustration. Tony paused, looking at her in disbelief. Wait, what? Are you telling me that every phone you've had just exploded? Hallie's face flushed, and she rubbed the back of her neck. Well, not literally, but yeah, kind of. They get all weird, and then they stop working or something happens. Tony took a deep breath, trying to hold back his laughter. Okay, now I know you're messing with me. Phones don't just randomly blow up. I'm not messing with you, she shot back, her arms crossed defensively. They just don't work for me. It's not like I want them to break. He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. All right, I'll bite. Maybe we'll start with something simple. If the phone gets weird, I'll fix it. She narrowed her eyes. You can fix it? Tony grinned, his confidence returning. I can fix pretty much anything. Trust me. It had been a few days since she started living in the tower with her father, yet it still felt like a strange dream. Tony wasn't pressuring her to talk her for anything. Really, he spent most of his time in his workshop, only emerging occasionally. When he did, he made casual conversation with her. But there was always a distance between them, an unspoken tension neither seemed ready to address. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Maybe more questions. Maybe some kind of emotional outburst. Instead, Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, and now, apparently, her father, treated her presence with an almost unsettling ease. It was as if he had simply accepted her existence and moved on, slotting her into his world without hesitation. It should have been comforting. Instead, it left her feeling adrift. The tower was impressive, all sleek metal and glass, with a view that stretched endlessly beyond the city. Yet, for all its luxury, it felt cold, like a place designed for efficiency, not comfort. At night, she wandered the halls, trailing her fingers along the walls, listening to the distant hum of machinery from Tony's workshop. That was where he spent most of his time, buried in blueprints and tech, always tinkering, always building. When he did emerge, their conversations were light, almost superficial. Sleeping, okay? He asked once, leaning against the kitchen counter as she poured herself coffee. Yeah, she lied. Good, he said, taking a sip from his own mug. If you need anything, more blankets, a flamethrower, a jetpack, just let me know. She huffed a quiet laugh, shaking her head. I'll keep that in mind. And that was it. No praying. No awkward attempts at fatherly bonding. Just an easy, almost indifferent interaction that left her more confused than comforted. Maybe this was just how Tony Stark dealt with things, by not dealing with them at all. That night, as she padded into the kitchen for a glass of water, she heard something landing on the balcony with a soft but distinct thud. Her breath caught, heart hammering in her chest. She tightened her grip on the wand in her hand, the smooth wood grounding her as she stepped forward. The city lights outside cast shifting shadows against the glass. Doors leading to the balcony, warping the figure standing just beyond them. Or, had they found her? Had they come to take her away? Her pulse roared in her ears as she inched closer, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. Slowly, she reached for the balcony door, fingers trembling, every muscle in her body coiled tight. With a deep breath, she flung it open, and froze. The figure before her was not an oar. It was a freaking robot, red and gold like a damn Gryffindor flag come to life. Her fingers clenched around her wand as she stared at the mechanical figure standing on the balcony. The glowing eyes, the sleek metal plating, the whir of hidden serviette was unlike anything she had ever seen. Not a suit of enchanted armor. Not an inferious or a magical construct. Technology. Would magic even work on it? The robot took a step forward. She took a step back, her breath quickening, pulse thundering in her ears. She started, barely managing the word past her dry throat. The thing raised a hand palm glowing, humming with energy. Then it stopped. Kid, the voice, robotic but oddly familiar, sent a fresh jolt of panic through her. Before she could react, the suit's faceplate slid open with a sharp hiss, revealing. "Tony!" she shrieked, heart slamming against her ribs. In her panic, she shoved the elder wand away so fast it dug into her palm, leaving a sharp sting. The red and gold armor began to shift, plates folding and retracting until it was gone, disappearing into the device on Tony's chest like it had never been there at all. He stepped inside the kitchen, utterly unfazed, as if he hadn't just dropped onto the balcony in a walking tank. "Didn't you know I was Iron Man?" he asked, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge like this was the most normal thing in the world. "The whole world knows." She was still staring, still trying to get her pulse under control. "You were inside that?" Yeah?" He cracked the bottle open. "Unless you think I just remote control these things for fun. Which, to be fair, sometimes I do." She swallowed hard, fingers still tingling from how tightly she had been gripping her wand. "Holy shit." His expression shifted. The usual arrogance faded, replaced by something quieter.
"I'm sorry, kid."
"I thought you knew. I am Iron Man." She frowned. "What is Iron Man?" Tony blinked. Once, twice. "Are you serious?" His voice was different now, not amused, not even annoyed, just thrown. "Iron Man? The Avengers? Earth's mightiest heroes?" She hesitated, watching him carefully. There was something in the way he looked at her now, something cautious, calculating, like she had just turned into a puzzle he wasn't sure how to solve. She bit her lip. "So, is it like a band, or?" Tony stared at her. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then he let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh, more out of shock than amusement. "A band?" he repeated, like he physically couldn't believe the words had come out of her mouth. She shrugged, feeling strangely defensive. "I don't know. You said, Avengers? Like I was supposed to just get it. Sounds like a band name to me." Tony dragged a hand over his face again, muttering something under his breath before pinching the bridge of his nose. "Okay, wow, this ice okay. First of all, no, we're not a band. Though now that I'm thinking about it, if we did start one, I'd obviously be the lead singer." Second asterisk, he dropped his hand and looked at her more seriously. "How do you not know this?" She shifted uncomfortably. "I just don't." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't push. Instead, he exhaled, rolling his shoulders like he was forcing himself to let it go. "All right," he said finally. "Fine. But if you ask me who Captain America is, I might actually lose my mind." She frowned. "Captain who?" Tony groaned loudly, throwing his head back. "Oh my God. This is actually happening." But before he could spiral any further, she blinked, something clicking in her mind. "Wait, I know him. That's the one who fought Hitler, right?" Tony froze mid-complaint, his hand still dramatically in his hair. He blinked at her like she had just started speaking in tongues. "What?" She nodded, more certain now. "Yeah. Captain America. He fought in World War II. I remember reading about him in a history book." Tony squinted. "That is what made it into history books. Not the part where he got frozen in ice for 70 years? Or the part where he's currently alive and running around with a shield?" Her mouth fell open. "What?" "Yeah, what?" Tony mimicked, throwing up his hands. "See? That's the reaction I was expecting earlier." She stared at him, struggling to process. "He's alive? Very. And still annoyingly righteous." Tony huffed, crossing his arms. "Great. So you know pre-Ice Cube Cap? But not literally anything else that's happened since?" She gave him a flat look. "Clearly." Tony sighed. "Okay, that's it. We're having an education day tomorrow. You, me, and a whole lot of YouTube." She groaned. "That sounds awful." "Yeah, well, so is not knowing who Iron Man is." He gestured to himself. "You're living with me, kid. That's just embarrassing." And they did just that the next day. Tony pulled up YouTube on the giant TiVo the Dosleys wouldn't have even dreamed of owning. It was so massive she half expected it to take up an entire wall at Hogwarts if someone tried to bring it there, Then, with a dramatic flourish, he turned to her and said, "Welcome to Avengers 101. Try to keep up." She had expected it to be boring. A lecture, maybe. Instead, she ended up watching hours of chaotic, over-the-top footage, news clips, interviews, battle recordings, and, to Tony's absolute delight, meme compilations of himself. "See that?" He pointed at the screen as footage played of him blasting some alien creature mid-air. "That style. None of the others have that." Asterisk, she snorted. "Is that what you're focusing on?" "Obviously. Saving the world is important, but saving the world with flair? That's an art form." It was honestly the most fun she'd had in a long time. Tony was hilarious in a way she hadn't expected. His commentary was sharp, sarcastic, and just so full of himself, but in a way that made her laugh rather than roll her eyes. He mimicked the reporters' voices, gave the heroes ridiculous nicknames, asterisk Captain Tight Pants for Steve, Point Break for Thor, and had an absolute field day mocking his own bad decisions. Somewhere between an overdramatic reading of an article calling him a reckless playboy and a video titled Tony Stark being a disaster for 10 minutes straight, she realized something strange. She was comfortable. She hadn't even noticed when she stopped sitting stiffly, or when she let herself laugh without hesitation. For the first time since arriving at the tower, she wasn't overthinking every word, every action. Tony noticed too. He didn't say anything, didn't make a big deal out of it. But at one point, during a clip of him arguing with Captain America on screen, he glanced at her, saw her grinning, and just smirked to himself. Like he knew, like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be so bad after all. While she was eating what felt like her 5th bag of popcorn, Friday's voice suddenly echoed through the room. "Boss, Miss Potts is at the door." Hallie paused mid-chew, blinking up at the ceiling. "Miss Potts?" She turned to Tony, expecting him to brush it off with some sarcastic comment. Instead, his whole demeanor shifted. The usual smirk disappeared. His shoulders tensed just slightly, and he ran a hand through his hira a little too quickly, like he was bracing for something. "Right," he muttered. "Let her in." Before Hallie could even ask who Miss Potts was, the elevator doors slid open. The woman who stepped inside was intimidating in a way Hallie hadn't expected. Not because she looked mean, but because she carried herself like someone who ran the world and had no patience for nonsense. She was tall, sharply dressed, and so effortlessly put together that Hallie suddenly felt very aware of the fact that she was slouched on the couch in an oversized t-shirt, covered in popcorn dust. "Tony," the woman said smoothly, stepping forward with purpose. Hallie froze. Her eyes flicked to Tony, waiting for him to explain, because clearly he knew who this was. Tony forced a smile that was just a little too wide. "Pep, hey, didn't expect you to swing by." Pepper narrowed her eyes. "Clearly, you've been ignoring my calls." Tony let out a forced, awkward laugh. "Not ignoring, just busy." He gestured vaguely at the TV, where a paused video of Iron Man's most chaotic moments still sat. "Educating." Pepper's gaze flicked to the screen, then to the empty popcorn bags, then finally to Hallie. Hallie froze. The second Pepper's sharp blue eyes landed on her, Hallie felt pinned in place. A long, heavy silence filled the room. Then, very slowly, Pepper turned back to Tony, her voice calm but dangerously controlled. "Tony, who is this?" Tony inhaled. "So." He clapped his hands together, glancing at Hallie before looking back at Pepper. "Funny story, Tony." Her tone cut through his stalling like a knife. He winced. "Okay, look, we can talk about this, but maybe not." He gestured vaguely toward Hallie. "Right here." Hallie stiffened. "Wait, what?" Tony gave her a look, one that made her stomach twist. "Kid." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "Go to your room for a sec, all right?" Hallie felt heat creep up her neck. "Seriously?" Tony didn't waver. "Seriously." For a second, she considered pushing back. But Pepper was still watching her, and the longer the silence stretched, the more obvious it became. "She has no idea who I am." Tony hadn't told her. Pepper turned back to him, arms crossed, and her voice had an edge now. "Tony, please tell me you did not just randomly take in a child." Hallie's stomach dropped. Tony sighed, running a hand down his face. That's not, because that's illegal, Pepper cut in sharply. You can't just collect a child like a pet, Tony. Hallie stared. I'm right here, you know. Pepper blinked, as if just remembering she was still standing there. Then very slowly she exhaled. Right. Sorry, sweetheart. She took a step back and gestured toward the hallway. But she shouldn't be. Hallie clenched her jaw. She didn't like being sent away. She hated being left out of conversations about her. But something about the way Tony wouldn't meet her eyes told her this wasn't a fight she was going to win. So, without another word, she grabbed her wand off the couch, shoved it into her pocket, and walked toward the hallway. Just before stepping out of sight, she glanced back. Pepper was turned fully toward Tony now, eyes sharp, hands on her hips. Tony let out a long breath and rubbed his temple. Okay, so, before you say anything asterisk, the hallway door shut behind Hallie, cutting him off. And just like that, she was out. The second the door shut behind Hallie, Tony let out a slow breath and turned to face Pepper. She was frozen. Not in the angry, arms crossed, you've really done it this time, Tony way. No, this was worse. This was Pepper Potts in absolute shock, the kind where her brain was so overloaded that her body hadn't even decided how to react yet. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She just stared at him, like he had just casually announced he'd married an alien and was moving to Jupiter. Tony cleared his throat. So,
Surprise?
Pepper finally blinked, and just like that, her systems rebooted. Tony. Her voice was quiet, level, but that specific kind of level that usually meant he was seconds away from disaster. Who was that? Oh boy. He forced a small, uncomfortable smile. Funny story, no. Damn. No wiggle room. Tony exhaled through his nose. Right. Okay. Her name's Hallie. He shifted slightly, hands shoved in his pockets. She's mine. Pepper stared at him like he had just spoken an entirely new language. Yours. Yeah. You have a daughter. Looks that way. Pepper blinked, like her brain had just short-circuited again. You have a daughter. Tony shifted his weight. Unless there's another Tony Stark running around, yeah. Her jaw tightened. And I'm just now finding out about this? In my defense, I just found out too. Pepper inhaled sharply, like she was physically forcing oxygen into her body before she could speak. When Tony hesitated. Few days ago, Pepper shut her eyes. Not a good sign. When she reopened them, her voice was clipped, controlled. And where exactly did you find her? Ah, here we go. Tony hesitated for half a second too long. Pepper's eyes narrowed. Tony, she said, voice suddenly sharp. Where? Tony sighed. In a holding cell. Pepper's entire body locked up. Her posture went rigid, like someone had just physically slammed her into place. She said nothing. She just stared. Tony felt the air in the room shift like all the oxygen had been sucked out. Finally, very, very quietly, she repeated, a holding cell. Yeah. Her expression didn't move. Tony scratched the back of his neck. She stole a broomstick. That did it. Pepper actually stepped back, as if she needed physical distance from the sheer absurdity of what he had just said. A broomstick, she repeated blankly. Yep, a broom, yes. A child who you are now legally responsible for was arrested for stealing a broom? Tony held up a finger. Technically, it was a high-end broomstick. Fancy wood. Probably made of illegal panda fur or something. Pepper didn't react. She just stared at him, horrified. Then, after a long, heavy silence, she let out a slow, controlled breath. Tony, okay, and he braced himself. She crossed the border illegally.
No passport. No visa.
Just waltzed in and bam.
Instant international fugitive.
The temperature in the room dropped. Pepper's shoulders straightened. Her arms folded. Now she wasn't just processing. She was calculating. Finally, in a voice so terrifyingly calm it made his skin itch, she asked, She what? Tony coughed. Yeah. That was a fun conversation with the authorities. Tony. He hated the way she said his name just now. Like a loaded gun with the safety off. That is a federal crime. Do you have any idea how serious this is? Yeah, Tony muttered. Deportation. Prison. Execution. They don't execute minors. Well, good, Tony shot back. Because it would have been super awkward if they did. Pepper looked like she was about to explode. Tony, how is she even here right now? Tony lifted his hands in mock surrender. I fixed it. Fixed it? Yeah. Pulled some strings. Made some calls. Got her citizenship sorted, processed the guardianship, and boom's officially my kid.
No deportation, no lawsuits, no FBI raids.
Handled. Pepper stared at him. Then very slowly, she sat down. For the first time since she walked in, she looked tired. She ran a hand down her face. Tony, not sharp, not furious, just exhausted. Tony felt something twist in his chest. Look, he said, more serious now. I know how this sounds. I know it's fast. I know it's insane. But she's a kid, Pep. She had nowhere to go. And yeah, he exhaled. She's been through some stuff. Pepper lowered her hands and looked at him. There was something new in her eyes now. Not just shock. Not just disbelief. Something understanding. Tony sighed, rubbing his temples. She's not some troublemaker. Okay? She's sharp. Too sharp for her own good. And I don't know what she's been through, but I know enough to say that whatever it wasn't good. He hesitated. She doesn't trust people. At all. She's just waiting for this to go south. And he stopped. Pepper tilted her head. And you? Tony exhaled. I don't want to prove her right. A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Pepper shook her head, but the sharpness had dulled. You really didn't think this through, did you? Tony huffed a small, tired laugh. Nope. Pepper gave him a long look. Then, to his surprise, her lips twitched just barely. Well, she muttered, for what it's worth. You're not a total idiot. Tony smirked. That's high praise coming from you. Pepper sighed and stood up. Call me if you need help. Tony gave a lazy salute. Wouldn't dream of it. Pepper rolled her eyes as the elevator doors slid shut. Tony exhaled, running a hand down his face. Tony was in his lab, tinkering with something when his thoughts drifted to Hallie again. His daughter was weird. All right, that might be a rude thing to say about his newfound daughter, but it was true. She was here in the US on her own, had run away from her guardians, who, strangely, never protested when he got custody. She didn't know how to use a phone. What kind of 14-year-old didn't know how to use a phone? She had no idea who the Avengers were, which was baffling because, at this point, the whole world knew. She was confident and funny one moment, only to withdraw the next, as if flipping a switch. Then there were the routines. She cooked breakfast and dinner, cleaned every day, for God's sake. Tony didn't want to disrupt her habits, but something about them gave him a bad feeling. And then there was school. She never mentioned it. Not once. And school was starting in 2 months. So he did what any responsible parent would do, had Friday run a search on her. He'd been trying to resist for a week, but this time, he couldn't stop himself. Hallie Potter lived with her aunt and uncle, Petunia and Vernon Dursley, along with their son, Dudley, since she was 11 months old. Her parents died in a house fire cause unknown. She attended elementary school in Little Whinging. Her grades were exceptionally high, until they suddenly dropped. Then Friday stopped. Tony frowned. But Friday remained silent. Friday? He prompted, setting down his tools. The AI hesitated for a fraction of a second longer than usual. There are inconsistencies in the records, boss. Tony straightened. Define inconsistencies. There are gaps in her school records, medical records. Even her legal documentation is unusual. For example, her birth certificate wasn't officially registered until she was nearly 2 years old. And there are no medical records past the age of 5. Tony's stomach twisted. That was weird. Okay, so maybe her guardians weren't great at paperwork. Keep going. Friday resumed. Her academic records indicate that she performed exceptionally well in primary school. However, her grades dropped significantly around the age of 7. Teachers noted a sudden change in behavior. She became quiet, withdrawn, and frequently absent. Reports from teachers mention unexplained injuries, though no official complaints were filed. Tony's fingers clenched around the edge of his workbench. Unexplained injuries? His voice was sharper now. Yes, bruises, a broken wrist, malnourishment concerns. But none of these were ever followed up by social services. Tony exhaled slowly, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He had seen enough neglected kids in his life to recognize the signs. She ran away from them, he muttered, realization settling in. That's why she never talked about her past. That's why she acted so differently. Friday's voice was softer now, as if registering his mood. There's more. Tony wasn't sure he wanted to hear it, but he squared his shoulders. Go on. There are no records of Harry Potter attending school after the age of 11.
No transcripts, no enrollment.
Officially, she should have started school 4 years ago. But as far as the system is concerned, she never did. That made no sense. So what the hell was she doing all that time? Friday hesitated again. Unknown. Tony's mind raced. This wasn't just neglect. This was he couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. This was so much worse than he'd thought before. His chest felt tight, a slow-burning anger building beneath his ribs. He had seen bad parenting, had lived through it himself, but this? Gaps in records. Unexplained injuries. No school history for 4 years. What the hell had Hallie been through? Friday, he said, his voice low and controlled. Tell me everything you can find.
Dig deeper.
Cross-check missing person reports, medical cases, anything. Yes, boss. Tony scrubbed a hand over his face. She had been here for a week, and he had chalked up all the weirdness to culture shock, nerves, or maybe just her being a little eccentric. But now, he walked back and forth, hands going through his hair. Boss, I found something else, Friday said, her tone unusually hesitant. Tony's gut twisted. Show me. A holographic display flickered to life. The moment Tony saw it, he froze. It was a wanted poster. Hallie's face stared back at him, slightly younger but unmistakable. The bold letters beneath it made his breath catch.
Undesirable no.
One Harry Potter, issued by the British government. Tony's brain stalled. Friday, what the hell am I looking at? This poster was circulated last year, Friday explained. Harry Potter was declared undesirable number 1A designation, implying she was considered a high-level target for reasons unknown. Tony's heart skipped a beat.
Undesirable número 1?
My kid. Yes, boss. However, 6 months ago, all records related to her status were revoked, and she is no longer wanted for any reason. Tony exhaled slowly, trying to absorb the information. So she was number 1 on some list and now nothing? That's correct, boss. Her status was removed with no public explanation. Tony clenched his jaw. Someone had treated his daughter like a criminal, only to suddenly drop all interest in her. What the hell had happened in her life? He ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. What else? There is no further information on her case, except for the fact that there were nationwide efforts to locate her. Tony shut off the hologram, standing still for a moment, his mind racing. Yes, he'd known Hallie for only a week. Yes, she was practically a stranger to him. But call it parental instincts or whatever else you wanted, Tony Stark was not about to let anything happen to her. She was his daughter now, and that meant no one was going to touch her. Let me know if you find anything else. Hallie was making crepes. Hallie was making crepes. She focused on the task, determined to be as useful as possible. She genuinely liked living with Tony. Since she was little, she dreamed of a long-lost family coming to take her away from the cupboard under the stairs. She'd envied the girls who had fathers standing behind them, offering love, protection, and care. She knew this was not the same thing. They knew each other for a little time, but she felt more comfortable than she ever did with Dursleys. She didn't want to lose it, so she tried to be useful as possible. Tony came in, his jaw tightening when he saw Hallie cooking. The smell of freshly made crepes filled the kitchen, but his eyes zeroed in on her, standing there at the stove, her concentration focused entirely on the task at hand. Morning, he said, his voice low and tight, as if he was trying to hide something, concern, maybe, or frustration. Hallie glanced up from the pan, offering him a small, casual smile, but she could sense the tension in his stance. Morning, you don't have to do this, Tony said, his voice softer than before, but the edge was still there, just beneath the surface. Hallie didn't look at him immediately. She focused on flipping the crepes with practiced ease, her hands moving quickly, efficiently. You don't like crepes? I can make something else. Tony took a long breath, his eyes narrowing as he took a step into the room, closer to her.
No, no.
I mean the cooking, cleaning, it's not your job. She froze for a moment, the spatula hovering above the pan. She didn't say anything at first, her eyes tracing the motion of the crepes. I'm just trying to be helpful, she said softly, her voice almost too quiet. Tony's gaze softened, but there was a firmness in his tone when he spoke. I get that, but we have a cleaning lady, and the cafeteria is just downstairs. I don't want you thinking this is your responsibility. You're a kid, Hal, you're not a maid. All right, she said quietly, setting the food on the table. She didn't say anything else, her eyes focused on the plate as she placed it down. She had been cooking for the Dursleys since she was old enough to reach the stove. What else was she supposed to do if she wasn't going to take care of things like this? She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want Tony to send her away. She sat down, picking up her fork, and slowly started to nibble on the crepe. The quiet clink of the utensil against the plate was the only sound for a moment, the tension between them lingering in the air. Tony watched her for a second before speaking, his voice steady but with a trace of concern. There's something I've been meaning to ask you about. She looked up at him, her eyes cautious, as if waiting for him to say something that would make her heart race again. What is it? You know, the schools are opening next week. She paused, the fork hovering midway to her mouth. Her expression became distant for a moment, as if weighing her options. She set the fork down slowly and looked at him. I guess. Well, you know you can't attend your old school. We need to pick you one. Hallie bit her lip, her heart pounding as the words hung in the air. She knew Tony wasn't trying to make her feel bad, but the weight of his statement hit her like a brick. How was she supposed to say that she never even went to middle school? How was she supposed to explain the years of gaps in her education without sounding like a complete failure? Her eyes flickered to the plate in front of her, as if she could find the words written somewhere between the crepes. She didn't want to lie, but she couldn't tell him she was going to a school for witches. She didn't want to relive the Dursley experience, and to be honest, she didn't know how even she would tell him. I was going to a school for troubled girls, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words falling out in a rushed, jagged breath. I didn't really learn much there, she lied. Hallie, yes. Her voice was tentative, the tension thick between them. Just tell me the truth. She hesitated, a slight catch in her throat. I am telling the truth. Tony's gaze softened, but his tone became firmer, more insistent. I know your guardians didn't send you to school. Hallie flinched, her eyes flicking away, avoiding his stare. They were going to send her to school, but she couldn't say that she went to Hogwarts by getting kidnapped by a giant. What the hell was she supposed to say? Of course he knew there was no troubled girls' school. It was just a lie Vernon made up. They haven't really enrolled her anywhere. Her hands tightened around her glass, her voice almost inaudible. They didn't. But it's complicated. Tony didn't push her right away, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. Complicated how? She shook her head, not sure how to untangle the mess of her life, how to explain the things she had been through without sounding insane. It's just complicated. Can we drop this? Tony's expression hardened, but there was no anger in his voice, just a quiet, undeniable sense of concern. No, we can't. I'm your father. I need to know these things. Her heart started to beat faster, her body unable to distinguish the weight of this conversation from the feeling of being chased by a bear. Panic clawed at her throat, her breath quickening, her palms sweaty. The lights above them flickered. She tried to calm down, but it didn't work. It's none of your business, she snapped, her voice shaking despite her attempt at defiance. Tony's face slightly hardened. It is my business. You are my daughter. Then you can find it out like you did. She shot back, anger burning in her chest. Her voice rose, shaking with frustration. He had invaded her privacy, pushed her into a corner, and she wasn't ready to face any of it. The lights flickered again, and the pot of flowers on the counter began to droop, the petals curling and wilting slowly dying. Tony pressed his lips together. He looked at her like he was going to say something then he looked at the flickering lights. What the hell is going on Friday? The RD department is testing a new machine, boss. The disturbance is most likely coming from there, Friday responded. He opened his mouth to say something but got interrupted by his phone ringing. Agent Fury is calling. Boss. Tony's gaze hardened. Ignore it. He says it's urgent. Tony rubbed his temples in frustration but sighed. Fine, put him through. A few moments later, Fury's gravelly voice filled the room. Stark, we need you. Lagos. It's all going to hell. The mission went sideways. What mission? Tony's voice cracked with frustration. Damn it. I told you she shouldn't be going on these missions. She's still learning how to control her powers. And this is what happens when we push her too far. Fury's tone grew sharper, a mix of urgency and frustration. Captain thought it was the right call, Stark. Tony's jaw clenched as he opened a hologram to get a visual on the situation. The devastation in Lagos was overwhelming. Buildings crumbled, and the aftermath was chaos. His stomach dropped as he processed the magnitude of the damage. What's the death toll? Tony's voice was tight, his eyes scanning the scene before him. Hallie, standing beside him, stared at the hologram in horror. Her face went pale as she absorbed the grim reality. Tony's jaw clenched tighter as he listened to Fury's voice, each word like a weight pressing down on his chest. 26 civilians. We're still assessing the situation, Stark. But we need you here. People are already starting to blame the team. Tony's eyes darkened as the weight of Fury's words settled in. He knew deep down it was their fault. Wanda had tried to do the right thing, but they had pushed her too far. This was the result of their decisions, their miscalculations. He rubbed a hand over his face, taking a moment to collect himself before responding. I know, Fury. I know it's our fault. And I'll fix it. There was a pause on the other end before Fury spoke again. His tone sharp but laced with a hint of exhaustion. Get here, Stark. Now. We don't have much time. Tony exhaled a shaky breath, frustration building within him. He glanced at Hallie, who was still staring at the hologram, her expression a mix of horror and disbelief. She knew as well as he did that this wasn't something they could fix with a simple apology or a quick fix. The damage had already been done. Hallie looked at Tony, the frustration from their argument gone. How did she even manage that? She asked, looking at the hologram. It was a mess. She wasn't sure how this can be a mistake. Tony was giving instructions to Friday stopped and looked at her. Wanda is just learning to control her powers. She must have lost control. What is her power? He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. Wanda's powers are complicated, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. She has telekinesis, so she can move objects with her mind. And she can manipulate energy, which means she can alter things like creating force fields or blasts. Okay. What in the Merlin's name? How could they even have a witch in their team? Wanda was clearly a witch. How did the Ministry of Magic even allow this? Tony turned to face her, his voice dropping with a seriousness she hadn't heard before. I need to go deal with this mess. Don't leave the tower. If anything happens, Friday knows what to do. Hallie nodded absent-mindedly. Okay, she said, her voice distant. Tony looked at her a last time and left. While Tony was gone, Hallie busied herself with middle school work, determined to fill in the gaps Tony had already started noticing. He had been digging, asking questions, nudging her toward explanations she didn't want to give. She could tell he wasn't satisfied with the vague answers she threw his way, and the last thing she needed was for him to push any further. So, she did the only thing she could. She asked Friday to pull up some educational videos, hoping to catch up as quickly as possible. To her surprise, the material wasn't just manageable, it was easy. Math problems that once seemed impossible now made perfect sense. History lessons she had never learned before somehow felt familiar. Science experiments, grammar rules, geography. Everything clicked into place faster than she expected. Maybe it was because an 11-year-old was supposed to be learning this stuff. Maybe it was because her mind had always worked this way, and Hogwarts had simply never given her a proper chance to realize it. Either way, she didn't have time to question it. What mattered was moving forward, getting herself ready for high school as soon as possible. Tony was already suspicious, already poking at the cracks in her story. If she wasn't careful, he'd start connecting that she wasn't ready for him to see. She couldn't let that happen, and she absolutely refused to go back to Hogwarts. Not after the way they had turned their backs on her. Not after they left her to fend for herself when she needed them most. She had saved them. She had thrown everything away, her safety, her future, her Lefido fight Voldemort. And in the end, what had it gotten her? A prison sentence waiting to happen. The moment the dust settled, when it was finally time to heal, everyone had turned on her. They wanted her behind bars for using the killing curse. In a war. As if there had been another choice. As if it hadn't been necessary. As if it shouldn't have been legal. The same people who had once called her their hero, their savior, had whispered behind her back, had looked at her with doubt and fear. Even the ones she had called friends. Even the ones who should have known better. The place that had once felt like home had become a bitter memory. A reminder of just how easily people could cast you aside the moment you stopped being what they wanted you to be. She had no intention of ever stepping foot in that castle again. The Avengers has arrived, Miss Stark. They are in the common room. Would you like me to inform you on anything else? She blinked and thanked Friday. It was weird being called Stark when she had been Potter all her life. I'll take a nap in my room. Can you tell him if he asks where I am? Of course, Miss Stark. Please call me Hallie. All right, Hallie. The room was heavy with tension. The kind that settled deep in Tony's bones. He'd been in 100 debates like this before, but this one was different. This wasn't about a business deal or an engineering dispute. This was about the future of the Avengers. Of all of them. And the way Steve was looking at him like he was already disappointed, already convinced that Tony was on the wrong side, made his stomach twist. Ross had left them with the Sokovia Accords, 117 countries backing it. Not just one, not just a handful. Nearly the entire world had come together to tell them that they had gone too far. And Steve was treating it like it was some government power grab. Like they were the victims. We need to be put in check, Tony said. His voice firm but not unkind. He didn't want to fight Steve. He wanted Steve to listen. Whatever form that takes. I'm game. Steve shook his head, frustration evident in every tense muscle. If we sign this, we lose our right to choose. What if they send us somewhere we shouldn't go? What if there's somewhere we need to be, and they won't let us? Tony exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. If we have one hand on the wheel, we can still steer. If we don't sign this, Steve, it's not like we just get to keep doing what we've been doing. They will force this on us. This is the best way to make sure we still have some control. Steve didn't look convinced. Of course he didn't. Tony, come on, man. Rhodey cut in, his voice steady, pragmatic. We're talking about the United Nations here, not Hydra. And what if they become that? Steve countered. Tony let out a sharp breath. Steve, I get it. I do. You don't trust the government. But you know what? Maybe we're not the best ones to be making these decisions alone. We've done a lot of damage. People are scared of us. You saw what happened in Lagos. At the mention of Lagos, Wanda shifted uncomfortably, and Steve's jaw tightened. This is the United Nations we're talking about, not some shadow organization, Natasha said, her voice calm but pointed. They're going to have oversight, and we have to be willing to compromise. Otherwise, we might not get a say at all. Steve glanced around the room, frustration visible in every muscle. I can't believe you're all okay with this. I'm okay with the idea that we need to be responsible, Tony said, and this time, he didn't hide the edge in his voice. He wasn't making this up. This wasn't some theoretical problem. He saw it every day in the mirror, in the blood on his hands. Ultron hadn't come out of nowhere. He had created him. Tony Stark had played God, and people had died for it. He wasn't about to let it happen again. Look, we can amend the accords later. I am already working on it. But first, we need to sign. If we don't, they'll force it on us, and then we lose any chance of negotiating the terms. Right now, we still have a seat at the table. If we refuse, we won't have a say in how this plays out at all. Steve's jaw clenched. And you think signing away our freedom is the answer? Tony exhaled sharply. I think compromise is the answer. We don't get to just ignore this, because we don't like it, Steve. 117 countries want this. It's arrogant to think we know the best. Steve's expression hardened. That's rich coming from you. Tony's mouth pressed into a thin line, but he didn't let the jab get to him. Not this time. Steve was angry, but Tony was tired. Who do you think foots the bill every time there's damage? Who do you think stands in front of cameras, working overtime to clean up our mess and get the public to stop seeing us as the villains? It's me, sir. I'm the one who does the press conferences. I'm the one who's paying for everything. I know the stakes here, So, would it really kill you to listen to me for once? I can't sign it. There was a noise which took everyone's attention. Tony's heart sank at the sight of Hallie standing in the kitchen doorway, completely oblivious to the tension that had just reached a boiling point. She was dressed in plaid pajamas, casually holding a can of cherry cola as if this were just any other day. But as soon as her gaze met the room, her eyes widened in surprise, and the air shifted. Tony cursed silently, pinching the bridge of his nose, fighting the frustration that churned in his gut. This is the last thing I need, he thought, feeling Steve's gaze burning into him, sharp and accusing. No one outside of Pepper knew about Hallie, and he had intended to keep it that way, especially not with things this tense. He exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure as the room shifted its focus from him to Hallie. A few of them reached for their weapons, eyes narrowing, ready to respond to whatever threat they saw in her. Tony moved quickly to shield her from them, though she seemed completely unfazed by the sudden hostility. She held the can of soda like she was in a normal, relaxed setting, completely unaware of how her appearance had changed the course of the room. Why aren't you in the penthouse? Tony's voice was strained, his nerves evident despite his effort to sound casual. His eyes flicked between Hallie and the group, trying to maintain control. Hallie blinked, momentarily thrown off. Friday said this floor had soda, she answered innocently, her tone light, as if this were just a minor hiccup in her usual routine. Tony's gaze hardened. She had no idea what kind of chaos she had just walked into. 1,000 thoughts swirled in his mind, none of which had to do with soda. He glanced at Steve, who was glaring at him with a mix of confusion and suspicion. Then back at Hallie, who was blissfully unaware of how out of place she was in this moment. Hallie, go back upstairs, Tony said sharply, stepping toward her and positioning himself between her and the rest of the group, his voice cutting through the thick tension. Her expression faltered, but she didn't protest. She simply nodded, taking in the room one last time before her gaze settled on Wanda. For a split second, there was something dark in Hallie's eyes, a flicker of something Tony couldn't quite place. Wanda noticed it too, her posture stiffening as Hallie's soft gaze sharpened toward her, like a silent challenge. Wanda flinched slightly, a brief, involuntary reaction that didn't go unnoticed. All right? Hallie murmured, her voice soft, tinged with resignation. She stepped back toward the elevator, the tension hanging in the air as she disappeared from the room. The elevator doors closed behind her, and the room let out a collective breath, though the unease lingered, thick as ever. Tony stood there for a moment, his body tense, the weight of the situation pressing on him more than ever. He turned back to face the others, but the calm he tried to project was shattered by Wanda's voice. Tony barely had a second to breathe before Wanda's voice cut through the room like a blade. Who is that? She demanded, her arms crossed tightly, eyes still narrowed in suspicion. Tony sighed, already exhausted. But Steve wasn't interested in waiting for an answer. Did you see how she looked at Wanda? He interrupted, stepping forward like this was some kind of intervention. And you just let her walk away? Tony gave him a blank look. Do you expect me to control how someone looks at someone else? Steve scoffed. If you're bringing random kids into our home, yeah, I do. Tony blinked. There it was. He let out a slow breath, keeping his voice even. She's not a random kid. And considering none of you pay rent, I don't think you get to decide who stays here. Wanda let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Oh, so now it's your tower again? Tony turned to her, narrowing his eyes. That's because it is my tower. Steve folded his arms, unimpressed. That's not how this works, Tony. We're a team. This place belongs to all of us. Tony actually laughed. A humorless, exhausted laugh. Oh, does it? That's funny because I'm the one who built it. I'm the one who pays for everything, the security, the food, the upgrades, the tech, the entire lifestyle you all enjoy here. So yeah, I'd say that gives me a little more say than the rest of you. Steve shook his head, giving him that disappointed, self-righteous look that made Tony's blood boil. You always do this. Do what? Tony snapped. You make everything about you, Steve said, as if Tony was the problem here. Like we're just here by your generosity instead of because we earned this. Tony's fingers curled into fists. You are here by my generosity. Wow! Wanda muttered under her breath, shaking her head. He really thinks that. Tony inhaled sharply, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. You know what? You're right. I do think that, because it's true. You don't pay a dime to live here. You don't contribute to the upkeep. You just exist here, and I let you. Wanda rolled her eyes. Yeah, because you owe us that much after everything you've done. Tony froze. A cold weight settled in his chest. There it was. The unspoken truth finally said out loud. Steve didn't correct her. No one did. Tony let out a slow exhale, his expression unreadable. That's what you really think, huh? His voice was quieter now, but the edge in it was sharp. That I owe you. Steve just looked at him, unmoved. We put our lives on the line every day, Tony. And you still act like we should be grateful to be here. You should be. The words came out before Tony could stop them, raw and unfiltered. Because I didn't have to give you this. I chose to. Steve tilted his head. And yet, every time we challenge you, you throw it back in our faces like it's some grand favor. Tony felt something in him snap. It is a favor, he said, and this time, there was no hiding the exhaustion in his voice. Do you think anyone else would put up with this? With you. Steve's expression darkened. Excuse me. Tony threw his hands up. Oh, come on. You act like I'm the problem, but you don't listen to a damn thing I say unless it fits your narrative. You don't ask for things, you just take. And the second I do something you don't like, suddenly I'm selfish, I'm the bad guy, and this place belongs to everyone. That's because it does, Steve said coldly. This is our home too, Tony. Not just yours. You're guests, Tony shot back. You are guests in my home and you've convinced yourselves that you own it. Steve's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, a new voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Rhodey. Tony turned, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, arms crossed, face unreadable. But the sharp edge in his voice was enough to silence the room. Steve exhaled sharply. Rhodey, stay out of this. No, Rhodey said flatly. Because I'm tired of listening to you two act like entitled brats. Steve's eyes flashed. Entitled? Yes, Rhodey said, stepping forward. You stand here in his home, eating his food, living under his roof, using his tech, and you have the audacity to act like he's out of line? That's rich. Steve clenched his jaw. We've earned our place here. No, you haven't, Rhodey snapped. You just decided you were entitled to it. And you've been so comfortable taking from Tony for so long that you don't even realize it anymore. Wanda scoffed. Oh, please. Like he doesn't hold it over our heads every chance he gets. Rhodey turned on her. Maybe because you never show an ounce of gratitude? Maybe because you act like it's owed to you instead of something he chooses to give. He stepped into the elevator without another word, Rhodey following close behind. Neither of them spoke as the doors slid shut. Tony stepped into the penthouse, the weight of the night pressing hard against his shoulders. His head throbbed from the argument still ringing in his ear. Steve's self-righteous tone, Wanda's sharp accusations, the way they spoke to him like he was the one in the wrong, like they hadn't been living under his roof, eating his food, using his resources without so much as a thank you. He had nothing left to say to them. Rhodey followed him in, his usual easygoing demeanor gone, replaced with a quiet that made Tony's stomach twist. If Rhodey didn't have something to say, then that meant things were worse than Tony was letting himself believe. And then he saw her. Hallie stood near the couch, looking small against the vast penthouse, her fingers nervously picking at the hem of her sleeve. When she noticed him, she stiffened, green eyes darting up to his face, then flicking away just as fast. "I'm sorry, Tony," she said quickly. "Friday said I have access to all floors. I didn't think." "It's fine." Tony cut in, his voice softer than he intended. Rhodey, still behind him, shifted slightly. Tony exhaled, squared his shoulders, and forced himself to just say it. "Rhodey, meet my daughter." Silence. Rhodey didn't react at first, like the words hadn't fully processed. His brows furrowed slightly, his mouth parting just a little, and then Hallie gave a small, awkward wave. Rhodey blinked. Once, twice, then he turned back to Tony. "You're joking." "I'm not." Rhodey let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Tony, he pointed at him like he was trying to make sense of something impossible. "Have a daughter?" "Yes, and you're just now telling me?" Tony dragged a hand down his face. "I needed to wrap my head around it first." Rhodey shook his head, exhaling hard. "Unbelievable." But even as he said it, his eyes kept flicking toward Hallie. And then suddenly he froze. His entire expression shifted, the disbelief fading into something closer to shock. He stared at Hallie, aerially looked at her, and his mouth pressed into a thin line. "Oh my God!" His voice was quiet now, almost like he didn't mean to say it. Hallie frowned. "What?" Rhodey let out a breath, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was about to say. "She looks just like you." Hallie's frown deepened. "I don't think so," Rhodey scoffed. "Kid, trust me. The hair, the face, the expressions, that's all him." He turned back to Tony, gesturing wildly. "You don't even need a damn paternity test. She's yours." Tony huffed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I noticed." Rhodey wasn't done. His sharp gaze scanned her face again, his brows knitting together. "Except the eyes," he murmured. "I've heard." Hale muttered. Tony glanced at her again. It was true. Her green eyes, so different from his, stood out against the features that were otherwise a perfect replica of himself. For some reason that made his chest feel tight. Rhodey exhaled, then turned fully to Hallie, crossing his arms. "All right," he said, nodding like he'd just made a big decision. "If you're a Stark, that means you're a menace by default. But it also means you're stuck with me now. So, from now on, you can call me Uncle Rhodey." Hallie blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, okay." Hallie was dumbfounded by Wanda's audacity. She had tried to push into her mind. Sloppy, weak, insulting. The moment it happened, barely a brush of pressure, like cold fingers trailing across her thoughts. Hallie felt it. Her entire body had gone still, every instinct sharpening. But she hadn't said a word. When Tony told her to go upstairs, she obeyed, silent, controlled. Because the last thing she needed was for him to find out about her magic like this. Not in front of them. Not when her skin was still humming with restrained power. She hadn't looked back. Not at Steve. Not at Wanda. Not even at the redhead who watched the whole thing like it was primetime drama. Back in the penthouse, she tossed the can of soda into the bin with more force than necessary and collapsed onto the couch. Arms crossed, magic buzzing under her skin like static. This was Tony's team? He'd talked about them like they were a family. Heroes, loyal to a fault. All she saw were cold stares, clipped tones, judgment in every glance. They treated him like a liability, not a leader, not even an equal, just tolerated. They reminded her of every adult who had looked at her like she was a problem, something to control, something to fear. Except Rhodey. Uncle Rhodey, she corrected herself. He was different, steady, quiet. He had the same kind of presence Remus used to have, watchful, kind without saying much. Still, sleep had been restless. And when morning came and Tony was gone, Hallie waited. Then she moved, silent as breath. She made her way down the stairs. Wanda was alone in the common room, scrolling through a tablet like nothing had happened. like she hadn't violated Hallie's mind the night before. Hallie stepped into the room like a shadow. She said nothing, just stood there, watched. Wanda looked up, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," Hallie said sweetly, her big green eyes wide with practiced innocence, the kind that always unsettled people. "I don't like it when people snoop." Wanda blinked, confused. "What? You touched my mind." Hallie's voice was calm, controlled, but underneath it, something darker stirred. The lights in the room flickered just slightly. The teacup in Wanda's hands cracked down the side with a quiet snap. "You don't get to look inside me," Hallie said softly, too softly. "I didn't." Hallie stepped closer. "You did." Sloppily, weakly. It was pathetic. The air between them grew heavier. Wanda straightened, clearly trying to find her footing. "Who do you think you are?" Hallie smiled sharp, unsettling. "The last person whose mind you'll ever touch without permission." Wanda set the cracked cup down with a shaky hand, fingers trembling despite herself. She opened her mouth maybe to protest, maybe to call Hallie back, but the elevator chimed. Steve stepped out. He looked between Wanda and the cracked cup, then toward the direction Hallie had disappeared, something tightening in his jaw. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low, alert. Wanda hesitated. "She came to talk." Steve's brows knit. "About what?" "She didn't like me using my powers," she admitted, guilt flickering in her eyes. Steve frowned. "You read her mind?" "Barely. I didn't mean Toit was instinct. She was just so closed off." Steve didn't say anything for a moment. He just stared at the cup, then turned on his heel and followed the trail Hallie had left. He found her in the hallway, just outside the library. "Hallie," she stopped, didn't turn around. "Is there something you want to say to Wanda?" he asked, arms crossed like he was talking to a soldier who disobeyed an order. Hallie turned her head slowly. "You mean, aside from don't dig into people's minds without consent?" Steve's jaw clenched. "She made a mistake." "No," Hallie said, turning fully now, her expression unreadable. "She made a choice. A clumsy, arrogant choice. That's not the same as a mistake." Steve stepped in more fully now, shoulders tense. "Hallie, Wanda's still learning. She didn't mean anything by it. She's just a kid." That made Hallie blink. Then she tilted her head, slowly, almost like she was trying to decide if he was joking. "A kid?" she echoed, her tone flat. "She's almost 30. She's not that much older than you," Steve argued. "I'm 14, Hallie said dryly. "She's nearly twice my age. So forgive me if I'm not thrilled about a full-grown woman digging into my thoughts and then hiding behind the excuse of being a kid." "She's been through a lot," Steve said, folding his arms. "So have I," Hallie snapped, her eyes flashing. "But I don't go around breaking into people's heads and then acting confused when they don't like it." Steve's jaw flexed. "You're overreacting." "No," Hallie said, voice lowering. "I'm reacting exactly the right amount. You just don't like it because I didn't stay quiet and polite like a good 14-year-old should." That landed harder than he expected. Wanda shifted behind him, guilt starting to flicker in her expression. Hallie's gaze lingered on her. "Next time ask." Then she looked back at Steve. "And maybe stop excusing people just because you like them." Steve took a step forward, his tone edged now. "You don't get to talk to people like that." Hallie didn't flinch. "Then maybe she shouldn't treat people like objects." The silence that followed was thick, sharp, and fragile. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Wanda said quietly. "I really didn't." Hallie looked at her for a long second. "Then don't do it again." And with that, she turned and walked out. The door whispered shut behind her. The broken cup finally slipped from Wanda's fingers and shattered on the floor. Steve didn't move. He wasn't sure how to feel. The tension in the tower had calcified. Conversations became clipped. Meetings were shorter. And whenever Hallie entered a room, at least one person left a little too quickly. No one brought up the confrontation, but no one forgot it either. Tony was busier than ever meeting with lawyers, UN officials, and senators at odd hours, always looking more tired than the day before. The Sokovia Accords weren't just rumors anymore. They were becoming law. Fast. And Tony was already strategizing how to keep the team intact or at least functional. Hallie watched it all from the edges. She said little, asked for less, and gave nothing away. She still cooked breakfast when Tony forgot to eat. Still helped Friday organize his schedule when he left his phone charging for 12 hours straight. But her presence was quiet now. Still, observant. From the penthouse balcony, she could hear pieces of the conversations below. Tony and Steve arguing. Tony sat at the kitchen island, rubbing his temples with both hands. There were folders stacked in front of him, all marked with government seals. The top page read, Sokovia Accords Final Draft. Hallie padded in barefoot, her hair a mess from falling asleep on the couch again. She slid onto the stool next to him and silently pushed over a cup of coffee. Tony gave her a tired smile. You know I'm supposed to be the one taking care of you, right? You can try, she said, voice dry. But you'll pass out by Thursday. He huffed a laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. For a moment there was silence. Then Hallie asked, Are you going to sign it? Tony didn't answer right away. I don't know, he admitted, voice low. It feels like the only way to keep the team from falling apart. But it also feels like I'm handing them a loaded gun and hoping they don't aim it at us later. Hallie nodded, thoughtful. They already don't trust each other, she said. They don't need laws for that. Tony glanced at her. You're a little too observant for a 14-year-old. I'm a little too observant for most people, she replied. Another silence. Then, softly, Tony asked, You doing okay? After everything? Hallie shrugged. I'm used to people not liking me. Hey, I'm fine. She cut in, not unkindly but firm. Besides, you've got bigger problems. Tony reached out, gently nudged the coffee cup toward her. Maybe, but I still worry. She didn't respond, just took a sip of her tea and looked out at the city below. In the distance, she could see flashing lights over the UN building. Something big was coming, and no one was ready. The tower was quiet in that strange way it got when something big was coming, like the whole place was holding its breath. Tony stood at the kitchen counter, half suit on, tie loosened, watching the steam rise from his coffee cup. His fingers tapped against the ceramic in a steady rhythm, but his mind was far away, already halfway to Vienna. Hallie wandered in wearing one of his oversized MIT sweatshirts, sleeves swallowing her hands. She didn't say anything at first, just grabbed a banana and perched on one of the stools like she belonged there. You always this tense before flying across the world to argue with powerful people? She asked casually. Tony huffed a laugh without looking at her. Only when I think the people I'm arguing with might blow something up mid-meeting. Charming. They sat in silence for a minute, the low hum of Friday filling the space. Then Tony cleared his throat. So, he started, tone carefully neutral. We need to talk about your schooling. Hallie froze mid-bite. Tony caught it. Yeah, I know. Everyone's favorite topic. I'm handling it, she said quickly. Too quickly. Tony turned to face her, leaning against the counter. I don't doubt that. Friday told me you've been studying. Like actually studying. Algebra, chemistry, European history. You even watched a whole playlist about mitochondria. Hallie raised an eyebrow. It's the powerhouse of the cell. Tony gave her a look. Don't sass me with memes, Miss I don't need a phone. She smirked but didn't say anything. I'm serious, he added softer now. You're clearly smart, but you're 14. You need transcripts, records, a plan. Hallie shifted on the stool. You going to ship me off to boarding school while you're out saving the world? Tony frowned. No. I'm not shipping you anywhere. But I also don't want you falling through the cracks just because your life's been complicated. She gave a small shrug, not meeting his eyes. It's not like anyone's cared about that before. Tony leaned forward, arms resting on the counter, his voice steady. Well, someone does. Now, you're under my roof. That means you get annoying questions, dry lectures, and yes, help with homework if you ask nicely. Hallie let out a breath somewhere between a huff and a laugh. I'm not asking for help, obviously. Tony smirked. But when you do, I'll be here. Or I'll have Friday send in a hologram of me looking smug and explaining trigonometry. She cracked a smile at that. Just a flicker. Tony let it hang in the air for a moment before gently shifting gears. Look, I'm not asking you to go to some stuffy prep school. We can take it slow. Hybrid program, private tutor, online classes, whatever works for you. But you need a foundation. Not for me. For you. Hallie shifted on the stool, finally meeting his eyes just for a second. I already have a foundation, she said, not quite defensive but close. I've covered everything. Algebra, chem, history, literature. Friday tested me on most of it. Tony nodded. Yeah, I know. She told me. Scored perfect. She smirked, but her shoulders were still tense. I'm not saying you're behind, Tony continued. I'm saying you deserve credit for what you've done. Transcripts. A record. Something that says Hallie exists and she's scary. Smart. Hallie looked down at the counter. I don't want to sit in a classroom and have to pretend I'm normal. Tony's tone softened. Good news, I've never done that either. That pulled a real smile from her. Small but real. He leaned in slightly. Look, we can make this what you want it to be. You don't have to go anywhere. We bring the system to you, not the other way around. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what if I mess it up? Tony's answer came without hesitation. Then we adapt. Hallie tilted her head. That easy? No, not easy, he admitted. But worth it. You're worth it. She blinked like she didn't know what to do with that. Tony stood and drained the last of his coffee. All right, I've got Vienna tomorrow. Political chaos, lots of suits, and zero good coffee. You'll have the tower to yourself. Friday'll keep you company. Tutor's coming around noon if you feel like playing genius. Promise to come back? Tony looked at her, serious now. Promise. She nodded, then added, if you get blown up, I'm not going to school. He gave a tired laugh. Fair. But I plan on making it back just to make you take midterms. Hallie rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered as he turned to leave. The tower felt too quiet once he was gone. Hallie told herself she was fine. She always was. But something in her chest felt coiled tight, like a string pulled taut waiting to snap. She told Friday to keep the news running on a loop in the corner of her screen. Just in case. She didn't watch it, not really. But she never turned it off. The next day, the tutor returned. New folders. New energy. Hallie stared out the window half the time. Caroline asked if something was wrong. Hallie said no. She did her work. Again correct. Clean, perfect. And again it meant nothing. By the third day, Hallie was watching the news while the tutor was teaching. She didn't even try to hide it. Caroline paused. You're worried about your dad? Hallie blinked, as if pulled out of a trance. He is, yes. She didn't sleep that night. She stayed curled up on the couch in one of Tony's hoodies, knees hugged to her chest, eyes glued to the news ticker like it owed her something. Reports confirm. Vienna conference postponed following internal delays. Speculation rises around security presence at UN building. Tony Stark expected to speak. She muted the screen and turned her face into the hoodie sleeve. She didn't cry. She just kept watching. Like if she stared hard enough, it would keep him alive. Hallie wasn't paying attention when it happened. She was trying to focus. Really, her tutor had been talking about comparative literature or something equally meaningless. Then Friday's voice dropped a single sentence into the room. Live footage now streaming from Vienna. Hallie's head snapped up. The screen, previously showing dull commentary, suddenly flickered to chaos, plumes of smoke rising from a grand building. Reporters yelling over sirens, shaky camera footage of civilians running. She stood up so fast the stool tipped over. Caroline startled. What's? But Hallie didn't hear her. She was already moving, already grabbing the nearest tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She searched every headline, every video, every live update.
Explosion rock in Vienna conférence.
Casualties confirmed. Officials missing. Tony Stark was present. Status unconfirmed. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Friday, she said, voice shaking. Call Tony. Calling Mr. Stark. The AI replied calmly. It rang once, twice, 3 times. For voicemail. Again, calling Mr. Stark. No answer. Hallie's breath caught. She tried again. Nothing. Again. Voicemail. Her hands trembled as she stared at the device. Then, slowly, her face twisted. No, she whispered. No, 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 damn it. She ripped the tablet from its case, turned it over, smacked it once with her palm. The screen blinked but stayed intact. It's not working, she said through gritted teeth. It's me. I broke it. I always, her voice cracked. She backed away from the table like it had betrayed her, like the metal and glass had just shattered something more than silence. In her mind, for one awful second, she saw Sirius. The way he vanished. One moment there solid, real, and the next gone. Through the veil. Through time. Through everything. And now Tony wasn't answering. Her hands curled into fists, nails biting her palms. No answer, Friday said softly, almost apologetically. He may be in a secured location. Hallie's voice was a rasp. Or he's dead. She didn't sit down for hours. She paced. She searched. She begged Friday to try again and again and again. When Pepper called, she ignored it. When Caroline knocked gently and asked if she should leave, Hallie didn't answer. Eventually, the tutor did leave. Silently, but Hallie stayed in the tower's common room long into the night, tablet clutched in her lap, eyes locked on a still frame from the Vienna bombing. Smoke, fire, silence, and one thought over and over again. He promised he'd come back. She was going insane waiting for Tony to answer her calls. It had only been 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Her knee bounced rapidly as she sat on the edge of the sofa, fingers white, knuckled around her phone. Nothing.
No updates. No responses.
Just silence. She wanted to go there and help them. Needed to. She couldn't sit still while things went to hell. Not again. Not after everyone. Her chest tightened. She wouldn't let someone else die on her. It was like she had a curse. Everyone who got too close just disappeared. Was ripped away. Tonks. Remus. Fred. Sirius, and now maybe. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. Her eyes were burning from trying so hard not to cry. Friday, she snapped, voice shaking. Open the door. I'm afraid I can't do that, Miss Hallie. Her jaw clenched. I'm not a prisoner. Open the door. You can't leave without boss's authorization. I don't care. Hallie took a step forward. Fists clenched, breathing sharp and uneven. The AI didn't respond. Open the door, she repeated. Her voice low and dangerous now, the edges fraying with desperation. Magic pulsed beneath her skin. She could feel it like static in her veins, rising sharp and hot, a pressure behind her ribs that curled tighter with every breath she took. Her fingers trembled as she clenched her wand harder, white-knuckled, as if she could physically hold herself together by sheer force of will. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. I'm afraid I can't comply, Friday responded, tone still calm, still maddeningly neutral. Across the room, she saw the flowers on the kitchen counter begin to wither. The petals darkened and curled, wilting as if scorched by invisible heat. One by one, they sagged and slumped, the air around them shimmering faintly with energy. She hissed a curse under her breath and turned away, dragging both hands through her hair in frustration. Get a grip. She tried to breathe, tried to ground herself, but her magic was prickling under her skin like needles, restless and erratic. The tower felt too bright, too quiet, too much. She could apparate. The thought struck her like a spark. She could be out in seconds, gone before Friday could blink. Her muscles tensed with the thought, wand twitching with instinct. But then reality struck, cold and final. The trace. She still had it. She knew she did. If she apparat, the ministry would know exactly where she was. They'd swoop in, questions blazing and wands drawn. And if they found her here, they'd do more than just take her back. They'd snap her wand like a twig. The thought made her stomach churn. Hallie had done her research before she came here. The American ministry didn't track underage magic the same way the British one did. They didn't monitor minor spell work closely, didn't come down on kids like a ton of bricks for every little charm. Especially not during emergencies. It was one of the few reasons she'd felt remotely safe using magic on U.S. soil. But if she apparat to Vienna of all places, that was different. That would light up every international alarm from here to bloody Durmstrang. She wasn't stupid. She knew how the OR office operated, especially when it came to her. She was a former war asset, a dangerous unknown. Still under scrutiny. Still considered a political inconvenience. "Can I at least go to the common room?" she asked, voice tired but steadier now. "Of course," Friday replied at once, the tone subtly gentler. Hallie crossed to the elevator, pressing the call button with more force than necessary, as if trying to ground herself in something tactile, something normal. The quiet hum of machinery was oddly comforting. As the lift doors slid open, she stepped inside and leaned back against the cool steel wall. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface. Dark circles under her eyes, jaw set too tight, fingers twitching as her wand slipped back into her sleeve. The doors closed with a hush, and the elevator began to descend. Each floor that ticked by only seemed to deepen the weight in her chest. What if he wasn't okay? What if she'd made the wrong choice again? She clenched her fists. The door slid open and she stepped into the common room and stopped. Wanda was there, standing barefoot in front of the open kitchen, sleeves pushed up, stirring something in a pan. Beside her stood the tall chrome android, the robot. Was that offensive to say? She wasn't sure. She didn't remember his name. Something weird and vaguely dramatic sounding, probably. They looked relaxed. The android had an apron on. An apron. He was holding a wooden spoon with absurd gentleness, carefully folding something in the pan while Wanda floated spice jars around them like it was the most normal thing in the world. Hallie lingered by the elevator, suddenly unsure if she should have come at all. Wanda looked up and smiled faintly. She said softly as she walked to them. "Did you hear from the conference?" "I saw the news." Wanda's brows knitted together, the easy calm replaced by a shadow of worry. "What happened?" Her fingers paused mid-air, as if afraid to disturb the tense silence hanging between them. Hallie's heart hammered in her chest, the words catching in her throat before she forced them out. "The place, it blew up." Her voice cracked, the weight of the news heavy on her tongue. "I can't reach Tony or Uncle Rhodey." No one's answered. The android's head tilted slightly, voice calm but strangely comforting. "Don't worry, Miss Haley. If anything had happened to them, it would be on the news." Hallie blinked at him, her pulse still racing. "How can you be so sure?" "Because someone like Tony Stark doesn't vanish quietly," he replied, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "And Colonel Rhodes is rarely far behind." Wanda glanced at Hallie, her expression softening. Vision's right. No news might be the best news for now, but Hallie couldn't shake the icy knot in her stomach. Silence wasn't neutral, it was suffocating. It was the space where everything she feared lived. She wrapped her arms around herself, more for comfort than warmth, and forced her voice to steady. "All right," she said finally, her lips pressed into a tight line. "I guess you're right." Her eyes flicked toward the stove, the rich scent of something savory finally registering. "What are you cooking?" "Paprikash," Wanda replied, glancing down at the bubbling pot. A soft wisp of steam rose as she stirred, her sleeves pushed up past her elbows. "Which reminds me, need to run to the store. We're missing a few ingredients." Vision was in front of her the moment she said that. "Alternatively, we can order pizza." "I am so sick of pizza," Hallie muttered, rubbing a hand over her face. But they all knew it wasn't about food. Not really. Her nerves were raw, her body coiled like a spring. The tower was starting to feel less like a refuge and more like a gilded cage. Wanda turned to Vision, her brow arching. "Vision, why are you not letting me leave?" He paused, not from uncertainty but from protocol, calculating how to answer without causing further tension. "It is a question of safety." Wanda frowned and took a step forward, trying to move past him. "Oh, I can protect myself." Vision's hand came up, not touching her, but firm enough to block her path. "Not yours," he said calmly. "Mr. Stark would like to avoid the possibility of another public incident until the Accords are on a more secure foundation." Wanda froze, her body going still, the fire in her eyes replaced by something quieter, something hurt. "And what do you want?" she asked, voice low. Vision looked at her for a moment, as though searching for the right configuration of words in a language too clumsy for what he meant. For people to see you as I do. The words landed softly, but they echoed in the silence that followed. I can go, Hallie chimed in, seizing the pause. Her voice was eager, pushing through the tension like sunlight through a crack. If no one else can, then let me. Just give me a list. I'll be quick. Vision opened his mouth. Miss Hallie, as I told you, Miss Hallie. Friday's voice cut in, crisp and final, echoing through the room. You can't. Hallie's shoulders slumped, frustration blooming hot beneath her skin. You are restricted to the premises until further notice. Mr. Stark was very clear. Hallie exhaled sharply, dragging her hands through her hair. Of course he was. She turned to Wanda with a wry, humorless smile. Looks like we're both trapped. Wanda didn't answer. Her expression was unreadable, something flickering behind her eyes. Too fast and too old to name. Without a word, she set the wooden spoon down on the edge of the pan. The soft clink almost deafening in the tense silence. She didn't look at Hallie as she walked away. Just turned, slow and quiet, and disappeared down the hall. The door to her room clicked shut a second later. Hallie stared after her, the warmth of the kitchen suddenly feeling hollow. The rich scent of paprika still hung in the air, but now it just made her nauseous. Brilliant, she muttered to herself, crossing her arms and sinking onto a nearby stool. Guess I'll just wait, like everyone else. Her spare phone vibrated in her pocket, jolting her so sharply her heart leapt and pounded against her ribs like a frantic drum. She yanked it out with trembling hands, the sudden motion sending a sharp ache through her wrist. Dad! The word escaped before she could stop it, soft and uncertain, trembling on her lips like a secret she wasn't ready to admit. Silence stretched on the line for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Then Tony's voice came through, laced with surprise and a teasing warmth that made her cheeks burn hotter. Did you just call me Dad? Her face flushed fiercely, heat crawling up her neck and flooding her ears. She swallowed hard, the embarrassment tightening her throat. She hurried to backpedal, voice awkward and breathless. Didn't mean to say that. Forget I said anything. Tony chuckled, gentle and knowing. Hey, it's okay. Honestly, that made my day. He forced a small, shaky laugh, fingers curling tightly around the phone as if to steady herself. So, you're okay? Yes, I'm perfectly fine. Tony's voice was steady but tinged with exhaustion. Sorry I couldn't answer before. I'm back in the country, dealing with Steve. Her brow knitted in concern, the weight of his words settling heavily between them. Why? What happened? What did he do? There was a pause, the faintest hesitation in his tone before he answered. It's complicated, but I'm trying to keep him out of prison. Her eyes narrowed, disbelief and frustration simmering beneath the surface. Why are you babysitting him? Steve's not your problem. Tony's voice softened, layered with quiet resolve and something like sorrow. He's my friend, kiddo. More than that, the world needs him. Hallie let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and raw. Right? The world would collapse without Captain America. Her voice dropped, heavy with a sting of personal pain. I've learned the hard way that sometimes the people you call friends don't see you the same way. There was silence on the line long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. Her stomach twisted. Then Tony's voice came, quieter this time, more careful. You saw them in a stressful time. I promise. They're not all bad. They were just scared, angry, confused. That doesn't excuse everything, but it explains a lot. Hallie stared down at the floor, her free hand rubbing at the inside of her elbow. Her voice was flat when she replied, Yeah, well, so you were. Doesn't seem like anyone cared much about that. Another pause, shorter this time, but heavier. I'll be there as soon as I can. Okay? Tony said gently. Yeah. Hallie hesitated. Then her voice dropped, softer and more fragile than she meant it to be. Tony, she swallowed hard, the words sticking to her throat, but she forced them out anyway. I'm really glad you're okay. There was a beat, then Tony's voice came back, lighter now, laced with that familiar teasing edge. So, what happened to Dad? That was a one-time deal, huh? her face flushed with immediate horror. "Oh my God! Shut up," he chuckled, clearly enjoying himself.
No, seriously.
"I get one dramatic, Dad. In the middle of an international crisis, and now it's like it never happened? You're killing me here. It slipped out," she muttered, dragging her hand over her face, mortified. "I was panicking. You weren't answering. I thought you were—" Her voice broke off sharply, the memory of that silence still too raw. Tony's tone softened instantly. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm just messing with you." There was a pause, and then, almost like he wasn't sure if he should say it, "But, for the record," another beat. "Didn't hate it." Hallie stared at the floor, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. Her chest still ached, but there was warmth now, too small, fragile, but real. "You're still annoying," she said finally, voice dry. She pocketed the phone, her fingers still tingling, the last traces of adrenaline humming low under her skin. But the tension was gone, or at least quieter. Her chest didn't feel like it was being crushed anymore, and for the first time all day, her thoughts weren't spiraling. She looked up and realized vision had left, silent as ever. The room was empty now, save for the quiet bubbling from the stove. The paprikash was still simmering, the scent richer now, filling the air with something warm and grounding. She wandered over, grabbing the wooden spoon Wanda had left behind, stirred the pot without thinking, then brought a taste to her lips. It was decent, a little underseasoned. She reached for the spice rack, adding a pinch of salt, then a little smoked paprika for depth, and a splash of cream to smooth the edge. Stirred it in slowly, watching the sauce shift from red to a deeper, silkier hue. It smelled better, already richer, more like something someone made on purpose, not just out of habit. Satisfied, she clicked the burner off with a quiet snick and set the spoon aside. She raised a hand and knocked gently on Wanda's door. "Can I come in?" For a moment, she hesitated, unsure why the impulse had struck her. Part of her still bristled at Wanda, at the way she tried to pry into her mind. But another part, something quieter, recognized the same loneliness reflected in those eyes. Maybe it was that, or maybe it was the memory of how she herself used to lose control, how anger once made her powers erupt like wildfire she couldn't contain. She had never killed that many people, though. Still, before she could speak, the door creaked open. Wanda stood framed in the doorway, clad in a simple black dress and boots dressed more for the outside world than the stillness of the room behind her. Her eyes held a cautious softness. Hallie cleared her throat, lifting the bowl in her hands. "I brought you paprikash," she said, a little awkwardly. She looked at her for a little while, then stepped aside. "Why don't you come in?" It was neat, almost sparse, but there were small signs of life tucked in the corners. A half-burned candle on the desk, the faint scent of lavender and smoke clinging to the air, a teacup on the windowsill still bearing the ghost of warmth. The heavy curtains were drawn, muting the light like someone trying to keep the world at bay. Wanda didn't speak. She moved wordlessly to the edge of the bed and sat down, her black dress folding around her like a shadow. Her boots were still on. It made her look ready to flee at any moment, like she hadn't meant to settle here in the first place. Hallie crossed the room slowly and placed the bowl on the table. Her fingers lingered on the rim a moment too long before she let go. "You fixed it," Wanda said finally, her voice low, not surprised, just noticing. "It was missing things," Hallie replied, her voice thin. "Thought you might want it anyway." "Thank you." Hallie didn't move to leave, but she didn't sit either. She stood there, uncertain, the silence pressing in from all sides. Her hand crept to her opposite sleeve, fingers tightening in the fabric like she was anchoring herself there. Then, without really planning to, she spoke. "I used to do stuff," she said, "when I was angry or afraid." Wanda didn't move. Her hand, mid-stir, went still over the bowl she hadn't touched. The quiet hung suspended for a breath. "I'm sure you didn't kill 26 people," she said softly, not defensive, but heavy, as if the number sat on her like a weight she'd never been able to put down. Hallie looked down, jaw tight. "Not by accident," she murmured. Wanda's eyes lifted, sharp with surprise. Her gaze lingered on Hallie for a long beat, narrowed, calculating, but not hostile. There was no fear in it, only recognition. Like something she'd sensed was finally stepping out of shadow. "Who are you exactly?" she asked, her voice quiet, cautious. "I felt it that day. In the kitchen. You're like me." "Not quite," Hallie replied. Her voice was calm, even though her fingers still fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. "But I have powers similar to yours." Wanda leaned back slightly, studying her. "Is that why Stark brought you here?" Hallie hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really. I knew him from somewhere else. He's helping me for a while." She paused, then added more carefully, "No one knows about my powers, except you." Wanda's brow furrowed. "Not even him?" "No," Hallie said. "He knows something's off, but not what, and I need it to stay that way." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Not as threats, not as enemies, just two girls with too much power and too many secrets, standing at the edge of something fragile. Wanda nodded slowly. "Then your secret's safe with me." "Thanks," Hallie said quietly. She shifted her weight, eyes flicking to the floor before meeting Wanda's again. "I know how it feels, when people look at you like you're dangerous, like you're a freak." Wanda's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened, just slightly. Hallie went on, her voice gentler now, but still edged with something raw. "I know, feels like they locked you up, like you're being punished for existing. But they're not trying to hurt you. They just want you away from the public for a while, so things don't spiral worse than they already have." Wanda looked away for a moment, her jaw tense. "It's hard to believe that when they don't trust you enough to open the door." Hallie nodded. "Yeah, I get that too." The silence between them was less brittle now. Still quiet, but not as heavy. Like something had cracked open, not fully, but enough for the air to move. "You're not the only one, you know," Hallie said. "That's all I wanted to say." She turned, half expecting the conversation to be over, but Wanda's voice stopped her. "You don't have to go." Hallie paused, surprised, then glanced back. Wanda shifted awkwardly and patted the worn edge of the bed beside her. "Sit," she offered, voice low but genuine. Hallie hesitated a moment before easing down beside her, the mattress creaking softly beneath her. She folded her hands in her lap, suddenly aware of how out of place she felt and yet strangely comforted. "How can you be so rational?" Wanda asked, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "You're a kid." Hallie gave a small shrug, a flicker of a smile tugging at her lips. "I grew up fast." Wanda's smile was wry, a touch bittersweet. "That never helped me." Hallie glanced at her, a flicker of vulnerability darting across her face before she buried it under a crooked smile. "Maybe it didn't help, but Hayuri really cool." Wanda blinked, a little thrown off. "You think so?" Hallie scoffed gently. "Are you kidding? You dress like a gothic assassin and you've got a robot boyfriend. That's peak cool." Wanda raised an eyebrow. "Vision is not my boyfriend." "Sure," Hallie said, nodding solemnly. "And the sky's not blue." "I'm serious." "Okay," she said, holding up her hands. "So he's your platonic domestic partner who just happens to gaze at you like you're the only Wi-Fi signal in a dead zone." Wanda tried not to smile. She failed. "You're insufferable." Hallie grinned. "Thank you. I try." A silence settled between them, but this one wasn't tense or awkward. It just was comfortable in the way that meant neither of them had to fill it. Hallie leaned back a little, studying Wanda out of the corner of her eye. After a long moment, she asked, "Did they train you?" Wanda blinked. "You mean like, officially?" Hallie gave her a look. Wanda shrugged. "I mean, Steve makes me train in the gym sometimes." Hallie's expression flattened. "Steve is dumb." Wanda snorted, caught off guard. "That's bold." "I stand by it." Hallie tilted her head. "That's not the way you should train. Throwing weights at walls doesn't help if your brain's on fire." Wanda looked at her, something shifting in her eyes. "So how would you train?" Hallie just smiled faintly, tapping her temple. "Start there. If you can't keep your head steady, your powers won't be either. Someone should have told you that." Wanda stared at her, brows drawn, but not in offense, more like curiosity. maybe even relief. Then she sat back on her hands and let out a breath. You're really weird. Thanks. You're welcome for the free wisdom. I didn't say thank you. I felt it in your aura. Hallie deadpanned. Hallie woke to the unmistakable sound of a struggle, dull thuds, sharp grunts, the crackle of energy against something solid. She groaned, dragging herself upright, eyes barely open. Of course. From the hallway, she caught a muffled voice. A man's, urgent and low. Come on, Wanda. Cap needs our help. Wanda's voice followed, quieter but heavier. I've caused enough problems. Hallie blinked, fully awake now.
Cap.
She shoved the covers off and padded toward the living room, barefoot and annoyed. The second she stepped inside, she froze. Vision was halfway across the room, encased in a web of glowing static floating, unmoving, suspended like a glitch in reality. Across from him stood a guy in tactical gear, holding a bow of all things, his posture loose but ready. Like this was normal. Like breaking into the compound to fight a synthezoid was just another Thursday. Hallie exhaled sharply through her nose. Oh great! The man turned at the sound of her voice, eyes narrowing as they clocked her like she was some unexpected obstacle. She squinted at him. Who the hell are you? He didn't even blink. Who the hell are you? They stared at each other for a long beat. Then Hallie jerked her thumb toward Vision's glowing prison. You did that. Yeah, she gave a low, unimpressed whistle. You're about to have a very bad morning, Legolas. He stilled at the nickname. We don't have time for this, he said, voice taut with urgency. Let's go, Wanda. Hallie stepped fully into the room, arms crossed, bare feet silent against the cold floor. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut steel. She's not coming. Wanda stood frozen near the doorway, torn between the past and whatever this was now between Clint, with his history and his loyalty, and Hallie, a girl she barely knew but who hadn't looked at her like a weapon. She can decide for herself, Clint said, not unkindly but firm. Wanda looked at him, and then at Vision, still caught in that pulsing trap, unmoving, and then at Hallie, unarmed, barefoot, with nothing but sleep-must hair and a don't mess with me stare. Hallie raised her brows. You really gonna bail while your toaster boyfriend's still floating like a screensaver? Clint made a frustrated sound. We came here to help her. Not whatever this is. Hallie tilted her head, stepping closer. Yeah? Well, maybe helping her doesn't mean dragging her into another disaster because Steve can't handle authority. Wanda looked between them, lips parted slightly, as if caught in the middle of a storm she didn't know she'd caused. Clint lowered his bow slightly. We need to move now. Hallie didn't budge. And I said she's not coming. For the first time, Wanda's voice rose, quiet but certain. I'm not going. Clint stared at her, visibly blindsided. Wanda, I'm done running, she said softly. And I'm done choosing sides. Shoo, Hallie said. Clint blinked. Shoo, Hallie nodded, perfectly serious. Yeah, shoo, scram. Be gone. He stared at her like she'd just slapped him with a dictionary. Did you seriously just shoo me? He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked helplessly at Wanda. Are you gonna let this small, angry person kick me out? Wanda gave him a lazy shrug. She seems to be doing fine without me. Clint huffed, slinging his bow back over his shoulder. Unbelievable. I come here for a prison break and end up getting roasted by the world's sassiest intern. Hallie tilted her head. Oh, I'm not an intern. Interns get paid. He blinked. Wait, so you're voluntarily hanging out with Stark? Damn. Maybe you are dangerous. The words hit a nerve, and a flash of anger surged through Hallie. It was like the unspoken assumption was always the same. The only reason anyone got close to her dad was to use him, to take advantage. Maybe I am, she said coolly, the challenge clear in her voice. And maybe you should watch your mouth. Hallie took a step closer, voice hardening. Because whatever you think, he's the one who always cleans up after your screw-ups. And who knows, maybe this time he won't. Clint blinked, unsettled by how sharp she sounded. All right, he said slowly, voice quieter now. Message received. The next morning, the door finally swung open, and there he watched her dad bearing the marks of a hard night. A dark bruise spread like storm clouds beneath one eye, stark against his worn skin. "You look awful," she said, unable to hide the grimace tugging at her lips. Tony's lips curled into a crooked smile, his eyes still sharp despite the bruising. And here I was, waiting for tears, without another word. He closed the distance between them, his arms wrapping around her with surprising gentleness. Hallie stiffened at first, her head awkwardly pressed against his chest as if unsure where she belonged. The steady beat of his heart was unfamiliar yet grounding, a quiet rhythm in the chaos of her thoughts. Slowly, the tight knot of tension unraveled. The warmth of his embrace seeped into her bones, softening the edges of long-held loneliness. This wasn't like Molly's hug snow, thunderous pressure or aching cracks. This was something quieter, more profound. A shield, promise, a safe place to just be. Tony's brow creased as he studied her, the bruise beneath his eye deepening in the soft morning light. "Friday told me what happened. I'm glad you're okay." Hallie met his gaze, chin tilted just enough to catch the tight set of her jaw. She lifted one shoulder in a casual shrug, but her pulse thrummed beneath her skin, alive with stubborn pride. "Nothing happened." He took a careful step closer, the thin carpet muffling his footfall. "You were in the middle of a crossfire with Clint, Vision, and Wanda. I wouldn't call that nothing." She gave a half-smile, her eyes sharp. "I gave him a piece of my mind." Tony shook his head slowly, a faint, wry grin cracking through the weariness etched on his bruised face. "That sounds about right," he said, the corners of his mouth twitching like he was amused despite everything. He stepped into the kitchen aisle, the soft hum of the fridge filling the quiet space as he reached inside. His fingers closed around a cold bottle, which he lifted with practiced ease. Taking a long, deliberate sip, he let the chill run down his throat before setting it back on the counter with a soft clink. Turning back to her, his eyes glinted with a mix of challenge and something almost like warmth. "How about a day in Queens? You, me, mission possible. What do you say?"